Let me tell you something that nobody in this room wants to hear. You are waiting for something. Maybe you call it a breakthrough. Maybe you call it the right moment. Maybe you call it inspiration, or opportunity, or luck, or God's plan, or the universe aligning in your favor. You have different names for it depending on your mood and your desperation level. But underneath all those different names, it is the same thing. You are waiting for something outside yourself to come along and change everything. To reach in and rearrange your life into the shape you want it to be. To do the hard part for you. You are waiting for a miracle. And I am here to tell you, with complete honesty, with no comfort and no apology, that it is not coming. Not because the universe is cruel. Not because you do not deserve it. Not because some people get miracles and you drew the short straw. But because miracles, in the sense you are imagining them, do not exist. They have never existed. And the belief that they do, the quiet, unexamined, deeply human belief that something magical is going to save you from the work, is the single most destructive idea you are carrying around in your head right now. And I can prove it. I want to start with a confession. When I was young, maybe 17, 18 years old, sitting in my room in Far Rockaway, New York, with physics books spread across every surface and equations covering the margins of my notebooks, I believed in something. Not God exactly, not in any conventional sense. But I believed in the idea that if I was smart enough, if I was special enough, if I had the right kind of mind, things would somehow work out. That the universe would recognize what I was and reward it. That talent was a kind of currency that the world would eventually cash. I was wrong. And discovering I was wrong was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because here's what I found out. Not from a book, not from a professor, not from anyone telling me. From actually doing the work. From actually sitting with problems that did not yield. From actually failing repeatedly and visibly and sometimes publicly. I found out that the universe does not know I exist. It does not care about my potential. It does not reward my intentions. It does not give credit for how hard I tried or how much I wanted it or how certain I was that I was destined for something. The universe responds to one thing and one thing only. What you actually do, not what you plan to do, not what you are capable of doing, not what you would do if circumstances were different, or if you had more time, or if you had not had such a difficult childhood, or if the system were fairer. What you actually, physically, concretely do, that is the only input the universe accepts. Everything else is noise. Now, I want to be careful here, because I think this idea gets misunderstood in a particular way that makes it useless. People hear, the universe responds to what you do, and they immediately translate it into work harder, grind more, sleep less, sacrifice everything, and then they do that for 3 months and burn out completely and conclude that the advice was wrong. That is not what I am saying, not at all. What I am saying is something more subtle and more interesting. I am saying that the story you tell yourself about how change happens, about how people become capable, about how understanding is acquired, about how a life gets built into something worth having, that story is almost certainly wrong. And the wrong story is not just a harmless misconception. It is actively preventing you from doing the thing that would actually work. Let me show you what I mean. There is a very common story about how exceptional people become exceptional. It goes like this. They were born with something, a gift, a talent, a spark, a special quality that other people simply do not have. And this gift, this innate specialness, is what separates them from everyone else. Einstein was a genius. Mozart was a prodigy. Feynman had a particular kind of mind. And the implication, the thing people take away from this story, is that the outcome, the great physics, the extraordinary music, the remarkable thinking, was somehow inevitable. That it flowed naturally and effortlessly from the gift. That the person was, in some meaningful sense, chosen. This is a deeply comforting story if you are one of the people who believes they have the gift. And it is a deeply paralyzing story if you are one of the people who believes they do not. Because if the exceptional outcome requires the exceptional gift, and you do not have the gift, then there's nothing to be done. You are not Einstein. You never will be. Why bother? But here is the thing. The story is false. Not partially false. Not true in spirit, but exaggerated in detail. False. And the falseness is not just in the conclusion. It is in the very first premise. Let me tell you what I actually remember about learning physics. I remember it being hard, not occasionally hard, not hard in the way that things are hard when you are tired or distracted, Hard in the way that a locked door is hard. You push and it does not move. You push harder and it still does not move. You try different angles and different approaches and you come back the next day and try again and the door still does not move. This is what real learning feels like. Not the comfortable, flowing, everything, making sense feeling that people imagine when they picture a genius at work. The uncomfortable, frustrating, I genuinely do not understand. This feeling that makes you wonder if you are cut out for it at all. I remember being confused for long stretches about things that seemed like they should be simple, about things that other people seemed to understand easily. And I remember the temptation, which I suspect everyone who has ever tried to learn something difficult has felt, to decide that the confusion was a sign that this was not for me, that the people who were not confused were the real physicists and I was just visiting. I did not give in to that temptation, not because I was particularly brave or particularly disciplined, but because I was too interested. The confusion itself interested me. Not knowing something, genuinely not knowing it, not being able to resolve it by thinking harder or reading more carefully, that felt like the most important possible place to be. Because that was where the real thing was hiding. Whatever it was that I did not yet understand, that was exactly the thing worth understanding. And this is the first thing I want you to take seriously. Confusion is not a sign that you are in the wrong place. Confusion is a sign that you are at the edge of what you currently understand. And the edge of what you currently understand is the only place where understanding can grow. You cannot learn something you already know. You can only learn from the friction between what you know and what you do not. The people who never feel confused are not learning. They are reviewing. They are staying safely inside the territory they have already mapped. And there is nothing wrong with reviewing, nothing wrong with consolidating what you know. But it is not learning. Learning requires entering unmapped territory. Learning requires confusion. Learning requires the discomfort of not knowing, which means that if you are not uncomfortable, you are probably not learning anything genuinely new. Now here is the connection to miracles. Here is why this matters for what I said at the beginning. The miracle story is, at its core, a story about bypassing the confusion. It is a story about transformation that happens to you rather than through you. The miracle arrives, the insight strikes, the breakthrough occurs, and suddenly you are different. Suddenly you understand. Suddenly you are capable. The confusion resolves not through engagement with it, but through some external intervention that makes it dissolve. And this is not how understanding works. Not ever. Not for anyone. Understanding is built, piece by piece, layer by layer, through repeated engagement with the thing you do not understand. Each attempt adds something, even if the attempt fails. Each failure is information. Each moment of confusion navigated, even imperfectly, even incompletely, extends the map a little further into unknown territory. And this process is slow. It is genuinely, frustratingly slow. There is no shortcut. There is no technique that compresses it. There is no hack that makes it faster than it needs to be. And I want to address something directly because I know what some of you are thinking. You are thinking, but what about moments of sudden insight? What about the experience of working on a problem for a long time and then one morning in the shower the answer just appears? Is that not a kind of miracle? Is that not something coming from outside yourself? No. And the reason it is not is important. What feels like sudden insight is the surface event. What you do not notice is everything that preceded it. The hours of preparation, the days of confusion, the nights of working on related problems that seemed irrelevant but were quietly building the necessary structures in your understanding. The insight did not come from nowhere. It came from everything that preceded it. The brain, working below the level of conscious attention, was assembling pieces that conscious effort had prepared. The shower was just where it finally surfaced. Archimedes did not have his insight in the bath because the bath was magic. He had it in the bath because he had been working on the problem of measuring volume for a long time before the bath. The bath was just the location where the accumulated work finally crystallized into a conscious realization. Remove the prior work, and the bath is just a bath. The insight is real. The feeling of sudden illumination is real. But attributing it to something miraculous, something outside the chain of cause and effect, something independent of the work that preceded it, that is a misreading of your own experience. And it is a dangerous misreading because it suggests that the insight could have arrived without the work, that you could skip the preparation and still get the breakthrough, that if you just wait in the right place at the right time, the universe will deliver the answer. It will not. The universe does not deliver answers. The universe provides raw material. You have to do the cooking. And now I want to talk about something that I think is even more fundamental than the question of how insight works. I want to talk about the question of why people stop. Why people who are genuinely capable, genuinely intelligent, genuinely interested in something, why they quit before they get to the place where the interesting things start to happen. Because in my experience, the failure mode for most people is not lack of talent. It is not lack of intelligence. It is not even lack of effort in the conventional sense. The failure mode is a wrong model of what the process is supposed to feel like. People start learning something. They feel confused. They feel slow. They feel like everyone around them is getting it faster and more easily. And they interpret these feelings as evidence about their own capability. The confusion becomes proof of insufficient talent. The slowness becomes proof of insufficient intelligence. The comparison to others becomes proof that they are in the wrong place, attempting the wrong thing, fooling themselves about what they are capable of. And then they stop, not because they could not have continued, because they believed a story about what their current experience meant, and the story was wrong. Here is what the confusion actually means. Here is what the slowness actually means. Here is what feeling like everyone else is getting it faster actually means. It means you are learning something genuinely difficult. It means you are at the edge of your current understanding, which is exactly where you need to be. It means the process is working exactly as it is supposed to work. The discomfort is not a warning sign. The discomfort is the sensation of growth. And the fact that it is uncomfortable does not mean you are doing it wrong. It means you are doing it right. I have watched students give up on physics, on mathematics, on science, who were more than capable of succeeding. Not because the material defeated them, because the feeling of not yet understanding defeated them, because they could not tolerate the period between not knowing and knowing, which is the only period during which learning actually happens. And this is the thing about miracles that I find most insidious. The miracle story does not just offer false hope, it offers a false alternative to the discomfort. It says, you do not have to go through the confusion, you do not have to tolerate the slowness, you do not have to sit with not knowing. Just wait, just believe. Just hold on till the breakthrough arrives and does the hard part for you. But the hard part is the point. The hard part is where the understanding lives. You cannot receive it from outside because it is not a thing that can be handed to you. It is a structure that grows inside you, built from your own engagement with the problem, assembled from your own failed attempts and partial successes and gradually refined approximations. Nobody can give it to you. Not a teacher, not a mentor, not a moment of divine inspiration, not a miracle. You have to build it yourself. And the building takes exactly as long as it takes. There is no shortcut. But here is the thing I want you to understand before we go any further. There is also no ceiling. I want to tell you about a game I used to play with myself. Not a game with rules, exactly. More of a habit, a mental discipline that I developed somewhere in my early 20s and that I think has been more valuable to me than any single piece of knowledge I have ever acquired. More valuable than knowing quantum electrodynamics. More valuable than understanding the mathematics of path integrals. More valuable than anything a professor ever taught me in a classroom. The game was this. Whenever I encountered something I thought I understood, I would ask myself one question. Can I derive it from scratch? Not can I remember it. Not can I recognize it when I see it. Not can I use it correctly in a calculation. Can I start from nothing, from first principles, from the most basic things I actually understand at a gut level and build my way back to this result entirely on my own? And what I found over and over again was that I could not, things I was completely confident I understood, things I had used correctly dozens of times, things I could explain fluently to other people, when I actually tried to derive them from scratch, I hit walls. I found gaps. I found places where I had been papering over a hole in my understanding with a formula I had memorized or an analogy I had borrowed without ever checking whether it actually held. And every time I found one of those gaps, I felt two things simultaneously: embarrassment and excitement. Embarrassment because I had been walking around thinking I understood something that I did not actually understand. Excitement because I had found something real to work on. A genuine hole in my map. A place where real learning could happen. Most people never find those gaps. Not because they do not have them, everyone has them, but because most people never apply enough pressure to their own understanding to make the gaps visible. They stay at the level of recognition and reproduction. They can recognize the right answer when they see it. They can reproduce the steps of a calculation they have seen before, and they mistake this for understanding. It is not understanding. It is familiarity, and familiarity is a very convincing imposter. This distinction between understanding and familiarity is one of the most important things I know. And I want to spend some time on it because I think it is directly connected to the miracle problem, connected to why people wait for external transformation instead of building internal capability. When you are familiar with something but do not actually understand it, you are in a very specific kind of trap. You know enough to feel confident, you know enough to not feel the confusion that would signal a gap, but you do not know enough to actually use the knowledge flexibly, to apply it in new situations, to combine it with other knowledge in creative ways, to push it to its limits and find out where it breaks down. Familiarity gives you the feeling of competence without the substance of it. And that feeling, that comfortable, reassuring, I already know this feeling, is one of the most dangerous states a mind can be in, because it closes off the curiosity that would lead to actual understanding. Why would you look more carefully at something you already understand? Why would you question an explanation that already satisfies you? The first step toward real understanding is always the same. You have to become genuinely dissatisfied with the explanation you currently have. You have to look at it carefully enough that you can see its edges, its limitations, the places where it stops making sense. You have to cultivate what I can only describe as a productive suspicion toward your own knowledge. Not cynicism, not the reflexive, nothing can be known, all understanding is impossible attitude that some people adopt as a kind of intellectual fashion. That is just familiarity in reverse, replacing comfortable acceptance with comfortable rejection. I mean something more specific and more difficult. I mean genuinely asking, do I actually understand this, or do I just recognize it? And being willing to sit with the uncomfortable answer when the answer is no. Now, here is where this connects to the broader question of how people change, how people grow, how a person who is not yet capable of something becomes capable of it. Because I think the miracle story is not just a story about external transformation, it is a story about a particular kind of internal transformation. The transformation that happens in an instant, the moment everything clicks, the before and after, with no difficult middle. And I want to examine that story carefully because there is something true in it mixed up with something very false. Here is what is true. There are moments when understanding shifts dramatically. There are moments when something that has been confused and murky and resistant suddenly becomes clear. I have had those moments. Everyone who has learned anything difficult has had them. They are real and they are extraordinary. The sensation of something that was opaque becoming transparent, of a structure you could not see suddenly becoming visible, it is one of the most intense intellectual experiences available to a human being. It is genuinely thrilling. I will not pretend otherwise. But here is what is false. The story that those moments are the learning. The story that those moments are what you are working toward and everything before them is just waiting. The story that the click is the point and everything that preceded the click was merely prologue. The click is the symptom, the work is the disease. Or rather, the work is the medicine, and the click is the fever breaking. Let me explain what I mean. When understanding shifts suddenly, what is actually happening is that the last piece of a structure clicks into place. The structure itself was being assembled brick by brick through all the confused, slow, apparently unproductive work that preceded the moment of clarity. The moment of clarity is not the learning, it is the announcement that the learning is complete. It is the system notifying you that the work you did has finished assembling into something coherent. If you want more moments of sudden clarity, the answer is not to wait for them. The answer is to do more of the slow, confused, apparently unproductive work that creates the conditions for them. The breakthrough is downstream of the effort, always, without exception. And this brings me to something that I think is worth examining very carefully. The question of what effort actually means. Because I think there is a widespread and deeply mistaken idea about what productive effort looks like. And this mistaken idea causes enormous amounts of genuinely well-intentioned work to be wasted. The mistaken idea is this: more time spent equals more learning produced. Hours invested is the primary variable. If you are not making progress, you need to spend more hours. If someone is ahead of you, it is because they have put in more hours. The solution to not knowing is more time spent not knowing in the presence of the material. This is wrong. And I do not mean wrong in a subtle, it depends on the context way. I mean reliably, consistently, demonstrably wrong in almost every case I have ever observed. What produces learning is not time spent. What produces learning is the right kind of mental engagement during the time spent. And the right kind of mental engagement is not passive absorption. It is not reading and rereading. It is not listening and re-listening. It is not highlighting and annotating and organizing your notes into increasingly beautiful systems. The right kind of mental engagement is attempting things you cannot yet do and failing and examining the failure carefully and attempting again with the information the failure provided. It is generating your own questions rather than absorbing someone else's answers. It is trying to explain the thing you are learning to an imaginary audience and noticing exactly where your explanation breaks down. It is asking not just what is true, but why it must be true and whether it could have been otherwise. Active, generative, self-testing, failure-embracing engagement. That is what produces learning. And it is much rarer than people think. Even among people who are spending large amounts of time studying, I have watched students spend 12 hours a day on physics and make almost no progress, not because they were not working hard, because they were working in a mode that felt like learning, but was not. Reading carefully is not learning. Watching someone else solve problems is not learning. Taking beautiful notes is not learning. These activities can support learning if they are combined with the right kind of active engagement. But in themselves, they are performance. They are the appearance of studying rather than the substance of it. And I want to be honest about why people default to these passive modes. It is not laziness. Most of the people I am describing are working genuinely hard. They are not avoiding effort. They are avoiding a specific kind of effort. The kind that involves being wrong in a way you can see clearly. The kind that involves attempting something and failing and having the failure be unambiguous. Passive study protects you from that. If you are reading, you are not failing. If you are watching someone else solve problems, you are not failing. The failure is always off-screen, theoretical, deniable. You can always tell yourself that you understood that. You just could not have done it yourself right now because you are tired, because the conditions are not right, because you are not concentrating fully. Active engagement destroys that protection. When you close the book and try to derive something from scratch and you cannot, the failure is right there in front of you, undeniable, specific, detailed. You can see exactly where your understanding breaks down. And that is terrifying to a lot of people because it threatens the story they are telling themselves about their own capability. But it is the only path. The discomfort of visible failure is the price of real learning. And it is not as expensive as it sounds, because once you get used to it, once you stop interpreting failure as a verdict about your capability and start interpreting it as information about where your understanding currently ends, the failure becomes genuinely useful. It becomes the most precise diagnostic tool you have. It tells you exactly where to focus, exactly which gap to close next, exactly what to work on. A student who fails clearly and specifically is in a much better position than a student who succeeds vaguely. The first student knows what to do next. The second student does not even know what they do not know. Now, I want to connect all of this back to the question of miracles, back to the waiting, back to the quiet hope that something from outside is going to come and change everything. Here's what I think is really happening when people wait for miracles. When people put their lives on hold for the transformation that is coming, for the moment when everything will finally click and they will finally become who they are supposed to be. I think what is really happening is this. They are protecting themselves from the information that active engagement would give them. Because if you never really try, you never really fail. And if you never really fail, you never have to update your story about yourself. You can keep the story intact, the story that says you are capable of great things, you just have not had the right circumstances yet. That you would be extraordinary, you just need the right opportunity, the right teacher, the right moment of inspiration. Waiting for a miracle is a way of preserving a self-image that real engagement might threaten. It is a way of keeping the possibility of greatness alive without ever testing it against reality. And the tragedy is that the very protection mechanism that preserves the possibility also prevents it from ever being realized. You cannot become what you are capable of becoming without finding out what you are currently incapable of. And you cannot find that out without actually trying and failing and trying again. The miracle you are waiting for is not going to arrive. But something better is available, something that actually works, something that has always worked and will always work and does not require luck or timing or divine intervention. It requires only that you start, not perfectly, not with the right conditions, not when you feel ready, now, with what you have. In the circumstances you are actually in, starting from the genuine level of understanding you actually possess, not the level you wish you possessed or the level you would possess if things had gone differently. Start from where you actually are. Try something you cannot yet do. Fail clearly and specifically. Examine the failure. Try again. Repeat. That is the whole method. There is nothing else. There has never been anything else. And now I want to tell you about the most important discovery I ever made. Not in physics, about learning itself, about what happens when you apply this method consistently over time, because I think you are underestimating something. Something about your own capacity for change, not in the miraculous sense, in the mechanical, inevitable, almost boring sense. I want to tell you about compounding, not financial compounding, though the mathematics is identical. I want to tell you about what happens to understanding when you apply consistent effort over time. What happens to capability when you keep showing up and doing the work, even when the work feels slow and the progress feels invisible, and you cannot yet see the shape of what you are building. Because I think this is the most underestimated phenomenon in all of human development. More underestimated than any physical effect I know of. More surprising in its consequences than almost anything I have encountered in physics. And the reason it is so underestimated is that it is invisible in the short term and overwhelming in the long term. And human beings are extraordinarily bad at reasoning about processes that behave that way. Let me give you the physics first, because I think it makes the idea more concrete. In physics, we encounter systems that grow linearly. You add 1 unit of input, and you get 1 unit of output. The relationship is proportional, direct, unsurprising. You work for an hour, you make a certain amount of progress. You work for 2 hours, you make twice as much progress. Simple, predictable, boring. And then we encounter systems that grow exponentially, where the output at each step becomes the input for the next step, where growth feeds on itself, where the thing that was produced yesterday becomes the thing that produces more tomorrow. These systems behave in ways that feel almost impossible until you have seen them enough times to stop being surprised. An exponential system does almost nothing for a very long time. It sits there looking linear, looking slow, looking like it is barely moving. And then it does everything all at once in a time period so short relative to the buildup that it looks like a discontinuity. It looks like a miracle. It looks like something came from nothing. It did not. The something was being built the entire time, invisibly, slowly, in ways that did not yet register as progress by any conventional measure. The dramatic change at the end was not a departure from the trend. It was the trend finally reaching the scale at which it became visible. Understanding works this way. Capability works this way. The development of a mind works this way. When you begin learning something genuinely difficult, the early progress is slow and hard to see. You put in enormous effort, and the results seem disproportionately small. You spend a week on a concept, and you still cannot use it fluently. You spend a month on a skill, and you are still obviously worse than people who have been at it longer. The input seems large relative to the output. The work seems out of proportion to the result. And this is the period when most people quit. This is the period when the miracle story is most seductive, because the slow, almost invisible early progress seems to confirm the story that you do not have the gift, that the people who were ahead of you had some head start you were not given, that the universe distributed its favors unequally, and you drew a short straw. The slowness feels like evidence of a ceiling. It is not evidence of a ceiling. It is evidence that you are in the early stage of an exponential process. The slowness is not a sign that the method is not working. The slowness is what the method looks like before it starts to visibly work. Every person who has ever become genuinely good at something difficult went through this period. Without exception, the period of slow, invisible, apparently disproportionate effort that feels like it is going nowhere. The only difference between the people who came out the other side and the people who did not is whether they continued past this period. That is the entire difference. Not talent, not gift, not special circumstances. Continuation Now, let me be specific about what compounding looks like in the context of understanding, because I do not want this to be abstract. I want you to be able to recognize it in your own experience. When you learn a new concept, really learn it, not just memorize it, but actually understand it from the inside. It does two things simultaneously. It gives you the concept itself, which you can now use directly. And it changes the way you see everything adjacent to the concept. It shifts your entire cognitive landscape in the neighborhood of that understanding. Things that were previously opaque become slightly more transparent. Problems that were previously inaccessible become slightly more accessible. Connections that were previously invisible become slightly more visible. This second effect, the landscape shifting effect, is worth 10 times the first effect. And it is completely invisible in the short term. When you are in the middle of learning something, you cannot see the landscape shifts it is producing. You can only see whether or not you have the specific concept you were working on. The broader effect on your cognitive landscape only becomes apparent later, when you try to learn the next thing and find it going faster than expected, or when you encounter a new problem and find yourself making connections you could not have made before. And this is why understanding compounds. Each thing you genuinely understand makes the next thing slightly easier to understand. Not because the next thing is simpler, because your cognitive landscape has shifted in ways that make it more accessible. The map you have built has more roads, more landmarks, more connections. The new territory you are entering is less isolated from the territory you have already mapped. Over time, this effect accumulates. Not linearly, not at a constant rate, but exponentially. Slowly at first, then faster still. Until you reach a point where you are absorbing and connecting new ideas at a rate that looks to someone watching from outside like something close to effortless, like a gift, like natural talent. It is not a gift. It is compounding. It is the accumulated landscape shifts of years of genuine engagement finally reaching the scale at which they become visible. The person who looks effortlessly capable spent years in the slow, invisible phase before they reach the visible phase. And because you only see them in the visible phase, because you were not watching during the years of slow, invisible work, the capability looks like it appeared from nowhere. It looks like a miracle. It is not a miracle. It is arithmetic, very slow arithmetic that eventually becomes very fast arithmetic. And now I want to talk about something that I think is even more important than compounding. Something that I think is the real secret. The real thing that separates people who develop genuine capability from people who plateau early and stay there. And it is not effort. It is not persistence. It is not discipline, though all of these matter. It is the relationship with being wrong. Let me tell you something about the history of physics that I think is instructive. Every major advance in our understanding of the physical world has come not from confirming what we already believed, but from taking seriously the places where our beliefs failed. The ultraviolet catastrophe, the failure of classical physics to predict the spectrum of blackbody radiation, did not yield to harder work within the classical framework. It yielded to the willingness to take the failure seriously enough to abandon the framework entirely and build a new one. Quantum mechanics did not emerge from the success of classical physics. It emerged from its failure. General relativity did not emerge from the success of Newtonian gravity. It emerged from the failure of Newtonian gravity to account for the precession of Mercury's orbit, a discrepancy so small that many physicists wanted to explain it away rather than take it seriously. Einstein took it seriously. He took the failure seriously enough to rebuild the entire conceptual foundation of our understanding of gravity, space, and time. The willingness to take failure seriously, to not explain it away, to not minimize it, to not protect your existing understanding from its implications, this is the most important intellectual virtue I know. And it is directly contrary to the miracle story. Because the miracle story says, your current understanding is waiting to be transformed. The failure-taking seriously approach says, your current understanding is waiting to be examined. They sound similar. They are opposite. Transformation from outside means you do not have to look at what is wrong with your current understanding. You just have to wait for it to be replaced. Taking failure seriously means you have to look directly at what is wrong. You have to find the gap, the error, the unjustified assumption. You have to be willing to discover that something you were confident about was wrong. And you have to be willing to update, to change, to rebuild from the place where the failure occurred. This is uncomfortable. I said that before, and I will say it again because I do not think once is enough. It is genuinely, persistently, never entirely goes away uncomfortable to discover that you were wrong about something. Even for someone like me, who has made a practice of looking for places where I am wrong. Even after decades of doing this, there is always a moment of resistance, a small internal flinch before the update happens. But here is what I have found. The flinch gets shorter, the resistance gets weaker, not because you become indifferent to being wrong, but because you accumulate enough experience of what comes after the discovery of being wrong, the clarity, the new understanding, the landscape shift, that the flinch is offset by something like anticipation. You know that on the other side of this discomfort is something better than what you currently have. And knowing that makes the discomfort easier to move through. The relationship with being wrong is a skill. It can be developed. It gets better with practice. And the practice is simply this. Every time you discover you were wrong about something, instead of minimizing it, instead of explaining it away, instead of protecting your current understanding from its implications, you stay with it. You look at it carefully. You ask exactly where the error was and why you made it, and what a corrected understanding would look like. You treat each instance of being wrong as a gift, which it is. It is the universe giving you specific, detailed, accurate information about the current state of your understanding. It is telling you exactly where your map does not match the territory. And that information is enormously valuable. More valuable than any confirmation that your existing understanding is correct, because confirmation tells you nothing new. Disconfirmation tells you exactly where to look. Now, I want to bring this back to something concrete, because I have been talking about learning and understanding in somewhat abstract terms, and I want to make sure this connects to the actual decisions you face in your actual life. You have something you want to be able to do, something you are not yet good at. Maybe it is a technical skill. Maybe it is a way of thinking. Maybe it is a kind of work that you find meaningful and want to be capable of doing well, and you are not there yet. You are at some distance from where you want to be, and the distance feels large, and you are not sure you can cover it. And somewhere in the back of your mind, maybe not consciously, maybe not in words, there is a hope that something will happen to close that distance without you having to cover it step by step. A hope that the right teacher will come along, or the right opportunity will present itself, or inspiration will strike, or circumstances will align, or something, anything, will bridge the gap in a way that does not require the slow, difficult, uncomfortable, failure-involving process I have been describing. I understand that hope. I have felt that hope. It is deeply human, and I am not going to pretend it is not seductive. But I want you to consider the cost of holding on to it. Every day you spend waiting for the miracle is a day you did not spend doing the work that actually produces the outcome. The gap does not close while you are waiting. It stays exactly the same size. Or it grows because the world around you keeps moving while you are standing still. The cost of waiting is not just the day you lost. It is the compounding that day's work would have contributed to. The landscape shifts that genuine engagement that day would have produced. The accumulated effect over months and years of waiting, of all the work that was not done because you were hoping for something that was never going to come. This is not small. This is the entire difference between who you could become and who you will become if the waiting continues. And here is the thing I want you to really hear. The process I am describing, the slow, failure-embracing, compounding, landscape-shifting process of genuine engagement, it is not a consolation prize. It is not the thing you do when the miracle fails to arrive. It is better than the miracle. It is better because it produces something the miracle could not. It produces understanding that is actually yours, built by you from your own engagement with the material, from your own failed attempts and corrected errors and gradually refined approximations. Understanding that you built yourself is different from understanding that was handed to you. Not just quantitatively different, not just more of the same thing, qualitatively different. It has roots. It is connected to everything else you know by the chains of reasoning you follow to get there. It is flexible, applicable, transferable. It can be extended, modified, questioned, improved. It is alive in a way that received understanding is not. When you derive something yourself, when you start from scratch and build your way to a result through your own effort and your own reasoning, you do not just know the result. You know why it is true. You know the shape of the argument. You know which assumptions it depends on and what would happen if those assumptions changed. You know where it fits in the larger structure of everything else you understand. You own it in a way that no amount of reading or listening or watching can give you. That ownership is what makes genuine capability possible. Not familiarity, not recognition, ownership. And ownership cannot be given, it can only be earned. Through exactly the process I have been describing, there is no miracle that gives you that. There is no shortcut to that. There is only the work, but the work is available to you right now, today, in the circumstances you are actually in, with the capability you actually have, starting from where you actually are. And that is not a small thing, that is everything. I want to talk about curiosity, not curiosity as a personality trait, not curiosity as something you either have or do not have, something you were born with or were not, something fixed and inherited like eye color or height. I want to talk about curiosity as a practice, as a thing you do deliberately, consciously, as a choice you make about how to engage with the world around you. Because I think curiosity is the engine of everything I have been describing. The compounding, the landscape shifts, the willingness to be wrong, the active engagement with failure, none of it happens without curiosity driving it. And I think most people have a fundamentally mistaken idea about what curiosity is and where it comes from and how it works. The mistaken idea is that curiosity is a feeling, a spontaneous, uncontrollable feeling that arises when you encounter something interesting and is absent when you encounter something boring. Interesting things make you curious. Boring things do not. Curiosity is a response to the world, not a stance toward it. You feel curious about what is inherently curiosity-worthy, and you feel bored by what is inherently boring. This model of curiosity is wrong in a way that has enormous practical consequences. Here is what I have actually found. Curiosity is not a response to interesting things. Curiosity is a way of looking that makes things interesting. It is not that interesting things produce curiosity. It is that curious looking produces interesting things. The interest is downstream of the attention, not upstream of it. You do not pay attention because something is interesting. Something becomes interesting because you pay attention to it. Let me give you a specific example from my own experience. When I was a young man, I had no particular interest in biology. It seemed to me like a descriptive science, a science of cataloging and naming and classifying rather than a science of deep principles. Physics had deep principles, beautiful universal mathematical principles that governed everything. Biology seemed to have names for things. I was not especially curious about it. Then at some point I started actually looking at biology, not reading about it casually, not picking up fragments here and there, but actually engaging with it the way I engaged with physics. Asking questions, trying to derive things, pushing on the edges of explanations until I could see where they broke down. And what I found was extraordinary. The deeper I looked, the more structure I found. The more questions I asked, the more interesting the questions became. The physics underneath the biology, the statistical mechanics of molecular machines, the information theory of genetic coding, the thermodynamics of living systems turned out to be some of the most fascinating physics I'd ever encountered. The biology did not become interesting because I discovered it was interesting. It became interesting because I looked at it in a way that generates interest. The curiosity came first, the interest followed. And this matters enormously for the question of how you develop capability in something you are not yet good at. Because one of the most common things I hear from students is that they cannot engage properly with the material because they do not find it interesting. They are waiting to find it interesting before they engage seriously. And I want to tell you as clearly as I can that this is backwards. The serious engagement comes first. The interest follows. If you wait until something interests you before you engage with it seriously, you will wait forever. Interest is not a prerequisite for engagement. Interest is a product of engagement. Now, here is how curiosity works as a practice rather than a feeling. When you encounter something, anything, instead of classifying it immediately as interesting or boring and adjusting your engagement accordingly, you ask a question, any question. The first question that occurs to you, why does this work? What would happen if this were different? What assumption is this explanation depending on? What would I need to know to actually derive this rather than just accept it? It does not matter if the question is good. It does not matter if the question leads anywhere immediately useful. The question is not the point. The question is a tool for directing attention, for making you look more carefully at the thing in front of you. And looking more carefully at almost anything reveals structure you did not see before. And structure is inherently interesting, every time, without exception. The universe is not divided into interesting things and boring things. The universe is divided into things you have looked at carefully and things you have not. Everything looks boring from a distance. Everything reveals structure and surprise and connection when you look closely enough. This is not a motivational statement. It is an empirical observation. I have never encountered a subject that did not become more interesting the more carefully I examined it. Not once. The apparent boringness of things is always a function of the distance you are maintaining from them. Move closer. Ask a question. Look carefully. The interest will follow. And now I want to connect this to something that I think is one of the deepest problems in education. One of the reasons so many people leave school having learned almost nothing of lasting value despite years of apparently earnest effort. And that problem is the replacement of genuine questions with performed answers. Let me explain what I mean. When a student sits in a classroom and hears an explanation, there are two things that can happen. The first thing is that the explanation produces a genuine question in the student's mind, a question that the student actually wants answered, a question that is connected to something the student is genuinely trying to understand. When this happens, the explanation is functioning the way it is supposed to function. It is creating an opening in the student's understanding that the student now wants to fill. The student is engaged. The student is curious. The student is learning. The second thing that can happen is that the explanation produces the appearance of understanding without the substance of it. The student follows the words. The student recognizes that the explanation is complete. The student notes that the answer has been provided. And the student files the answer away as something to be retrieved when needed, without ever having had the genuine question that the answer would have addressed. In this second case, the explanation has not produced understanding. It has produced a stored answer. And the difference between a stored answer and genuine understanding is the difference between a map and the territory. The stored answer is a symbol. It points at something, but it is not the thing itself. Understanding is the thing itself. And you can have the symbol without the thing, very easily, in fact. Students do it constantly. Here is how you can tell the difference. If you genuinely understand something, you can answer questions about it that you have never seen before. Not just reproduce the explanation you were given, not just recognize the correct answer when you see it. Generate answers to new questions. Apply the understanding in situations you have not previously encountered. Extend it beyond the cases it was originally derived from. If you only have the stored answer, you can reproduce it, you can recognize it, you can match it to familiar questions. But genuinely new questions, questions that require the understanding to be used flexibly rather than retrieved intact, those will defeat you. And they will defeat you in a way that feels surprising, because you thought you understood. You had the answer. The answer felt like understanding. It was not. And this is where curiosity comes back in. Because the way to convert a stored answer into genuine understanding is to ask questions about it. Genuine questions. Questions you actually want answered. Not questions you know the answer to already. Questions that probe the edges of the explanation. Questions that test whether the answer actually does what you think it does. Questions that try to break it. This is uncomfortable. Asking questions that might break the understanding you think you have is uncomfortable. Because if the questions succeed, if the understanding does break, you are back to not knowing. And not knowing is uncomfortable. We have been over this. But I want to add something now. There is a specific kind of question that is more valuable than any other kind. It is not the question that confirms. It is not the question that extends. It is the question that challenges. The question that asks whether the thing you believe is actually true. The question that demands not just that the explanation work in the cases you have seen, but that it work in principle, in all cases, in edge cases, in cases the original explainer did not consider. In physics, we call this testing the theory. Every theory, every explanation, every model is a claim about how reality works. And the right response to any claim about how reality works is to find the most challenging possible test. The case where the theory would be most likely to fail, the situation most different from the ones the theory was built to explain, the edge where the approximations break down and the limitations become visible. And if the theory survives, the most challenging test you can find, your confidence in it increases. Not to certainty, never to certainty, but to a well-earned provisional confidence that is qualitatively different from the unearned certainty that comes from never having tested the theory at all. This is not just how physics works. This is how all genuine understanding works. And it is the direct opposite of the miracle story. The miracle story asks you to receive understanding from outside. The testing approach requires you to build understanding from inside by breaking things deliberately and seeing what survives. Now, I want to talk about something that I have been circling around and that I think needs to be addressed directly. The question of motivation. Because everything I have described, the active engagement, the deliberate curiosity, the willingness to be wrong, the testing, the failure embracing, all of it requires sustained effort over long periods of time. And the question of what sustains that effort is not a trivial one. Because discipline alone does not sustain it. Willpower alone does not sustain it. The idea that you should be able to force yourself through the difficult work purely through self-discipline is, I think, another version of the miracle story. It is waiting for some inner resource, some reserve of willpower or discipline to appear and carry you through. And it does not work any better than waiting for an external miracle. What actually sustains effort over long periods of time is not discipline. It is meaning. It is the genuine connection between the work you are doing and something you actually care about. Not abstractly care about. Not care about because you think you should care about it. Actually, concretely, viscerally care about. Let me be specific about what this means in practice. If you are learning physics because you think you should love physics, or because someone told you that physics is important, or because a career in physics seems financially sensible, you will find the sustained effort enormously difficult. Not impossible, but difficult in a way that will wear you down over time. Because the effort is not connected to anything real inside you. It is connected to an external judgment, an external expectation, an external measure of value. But if you are learning physics because you genuinely want to know how the world works, because the question of why things are the way they are, and not some other way keeps you up at night, because there is something in the actual content of the physics that feels important to you in a way you cannot entirely explain, then the sustained effort becomes much easier. Not easy, never easy, but easier, because the effort is connected to something real, something that is actually yours. And here is the thing. You cannot manufacture this connection. You cannot decide to care about something and thereby care about it. But you can do something more useful. You can look for it. You can take the practice of genuine curiosity I described earlier and apply it not just to the subject matter, but to your own relationship to the subject matter. Ask yourself not just what is interesting about this, but what specifically actually moves you when you engage with it. What question, when you encounter it, makes you lean forward slightly rather than lean back? What result, when you understand it, gives you that specific sensation of something clicking into place? Because that sensation, that specific sensation of a thing clicking into place, is not random. It is pointing at something. It is telling you where your genuine interest lives. And following that interest, even when it seems to lead away from the official path, even when it seems to take you into territory that is not on the syllabus, is almost always more productive than staying on the official path out of a sense of obligation. The most important work I ever did came from following questions that nobody told me were important. Questions that arose from my own engagement with the material, from my own noticing of things that did not quite fit, from my own refusal to accept explanations that satisfied everyone else but did not satisfy me. Nobody assigned those questions. Nobody told me to pursue them. I followed them because I could not help following them. Because the connection between my genuine interest and the question was strong enough that not pursuing it felt like a kind of dishonesty. That is what real motivation looks like. Not discipline, not willpower, not forcing yourself through something you do not care about because you think you should care about it. Following what you genuinely cannot help following. And the practice of genuine curiosity is how you find out what that is. You do not know what you genuinely cannot help following until you start following things. Until you take the curiosity practice seriously enough that you are actually going places rather than just reading about places other people went. Until you are generating your own questions rather than absorbing other people's answers. Until you are doing the thing rather than preparing to do the thing. And this, finally, is where everything I have said in this discussion comes together. The compounding, the relationship with being wrong, the genuine curiosity, the active engagement, the willingness to fail, visibly, and specifically. They are not separate practices. They are facets of a single practice, the practice of genuine engagement with the world. And genuine engagement with the world is the only thing that has ever produced anything worth having. Not miracles, not gifts, not luck, not timing, not circumstances. Genuine engagement, sustained over time, connected to real interest, willing to be wrong, willing to fail, willing to continue anyway. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. And it has been available to you the entire time. I want to tell you about the last lecture I ever gave. Not the content of it, the feeling of it. The thing I noticed sitting there afterward, alone in a room that had just been full of people, thinking about what I had said and what I had not said, and what I wished I had found a better way to say. I had spent the lecture, as I spent most lectures, trying to communicate something that I was not sure could be communicated. Not a fact, not a technique, not a method. Something more like a posture, a way of standing in relation to the unknown, a way of being in the presence of things you do not understand that is neither defeated nor falsely confident, but something else entirely. Something that I had developed over a lifetime of doing physics and that I had never found a completely satisfactory way to put into words. And sitting there afterward, I realized that the thing I had been trying to communicate, the thing I'd been trying to communicate in every lecture I had ever given, was not really about physics at all. Physics was the example. Physics was the territory I happened to know well enough to use as a demonstration. But the thing itself was about something much more basic, about what it means to try to understand anything, about what the process of understanding actually requires from you as a person. And what it requires, I've come to believe, is a kind of honesty that most people find genuinely difficult. Not honesty with other people, honesty with yourself. Specifically, honesty about the difference between what you know and what you think you know, between what you understand and what you are familiar with, between the map and the territory. This kind of honesty is difficult because it is permanently uncomfortable. It does not become comfortable with practice. You do not reach a point where you have resolved all the discrepancies between your map and the territory and you can finally relax into certainty. The territory keeps expanding. New discrepancies keep appearing. The honest relationship with your own understanding is not a destination you arrive at. It is a practice you maintain forever, and the maintenance is always slightly uncomfortable. But I want to tell you something about that permanent discomfort that I think is important. Something that I did not fully understand until relatively late in my life. The discomfort is the feeling of being alive intellectually. It is the sensation of your understanding being in contact with the world rather than sealed off from it. A mind that is never uncomfortable about its own knowledge is a mind that has stopped growing, not because it has learned everything, because it has stopped looking carefully enough to notice what it has not learned. The discomfort is not a problem to be solved. It is a sign that the process is working. And here is what I want to say about miracles. Finally, after everything I have said about compounding and curiosity and the relationship with being wrong, here is the thing that I think is most true and most important. The miracle story is not just false. It is a symptom. It is a symptom of a mind that has become more interested in protecting its current understanding than in extending it. A mind that has chosen the comfort of believing it knows over the discomfort of discovering what it does not. A mind that is waiting for transformation because engaging with the process of transformation feels too threatening. And this can happen to anyone. It has happened to physicists I respected enormously, brilliant people who made important contributions to the field and then, at some point, stopped. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of decision, gradually, incrementally, each year a little more committed to the positions they had already taken, a little less willing to look carefully at the evidence against those positions, a little more invested in the map they had already drawn, a little less interested in the territory that map might not be capturing. The miracle they were waiting for, though they would not have called it that, was a result that confirmed what they already believed, a discovery that vindicated the framework they had built, a piece of evidence that justified the positions they had taken. They had, without quite realizing it, reversed the direction of inquiry. They were no longer asking what is true and working toward it. They were asking what would confirm what I already believe and waiting for it. This is the deep form of the miracle trap. Not the naive, hope-filled version of waiting for external transformation, the sophisticated, experience-hardened version of waiting for external confirmation. Both are ways of outsourcing the hard part. Both are ways of protecting a current understanding from the engagement that would reveal its limitations. Both are, at their core, a refusal of the honest relationship with one's own knowledge that genuine understanding requires. Now, I want to tell you something about what I think the alternative looks like. Not as an abstract ideal, as a concrete practice, as something you can actually do, starting today, in the circumstances you are actually in. The alternative is what I would call permanent beginner's mind. And I want to be careful about this phrase because it gets used in ways I find somewhat sentimental. I do not mean anything mystical by it. I do not mean the cultivated naivety of someone who performs not knowing as a spiritual practice. I mean something very specific and very practical. Permanent beginner's mind means maintaining, as a deliberate practice, the posture you naturally have when you genuinely do not know something. The posture of attention, of genuine question, of being willing to receive information from the territory rather than only consulting the map, of being interested in what is actually there rather than what you expected to find. When you genuinely do not know something, you pay a different quality of attention than when you think you know it. You look more carefully, you question more readily, you hold your conclusions more lightly. You are more open to being surprised. This is not because not knowing is virtuous in itself. It is because not knowing creates the conditions for genuine engagement. And genuine engagement is what produces genuine understanding. The practice of permanent beginner's mind is the practice of maintaining those conditions even after you have acquired knowledge, of continuing to look as carefully as you did when you knew nothing, of continuing to question as readily as you did when you had no answers, of continuing to hold your conclusions lightly even when those conclusions are well supported and hard won. This is very difficult because knowledge and experience naturally produce confidence, and confidence naturally reduces the quality of attention. You have been here before. You know what this is. You know how this works. You do not need to look as carefully. And in that reduction of attention, in that settling into comfortable familiarity, the map begins to drift away from the territory. Not dramatically, slowly, incrementally. Each small reduction in attention, a small increase in the gap between what you believe and what is actually true. The practice of permanent beginner's mind is the practice of resisting this drift, of choosing repeatedly to pay the quality of attention that the situation deserves rather than the quality of attention that your confidence tells you is sufficient, of treating each encounter with the world as if it might contain something you did not expect, because it might. It usually does if you look carefully enough. And I want to connect this finally to the question that I think is underneath everything I have said today, the question that the miracle story is really trying to answer in a mistaken way, the question of what kind of person you are capable of becoming. Because I think the miracle story is, at its root, a story about identity, about the gap between who you currently are and who you want to be. And the miracle is the thing that closes that gap without requiring you to be in the gap, to inhabit the in-between state, to be for an extended and uncomfortable period of time neither who you were nor yet who you are becoming. The gap is real. I am not denying the gap. The distance between your current capability and the capability you want to develop is a real distance. And it takes real time to cross. And the crossing is not comfortable. And there is no shortcut. But here is what I want to tell you about the gap, about the period of being in it, about the experience of being neither who you were nor yet who you are becoming. That period is not the price you pay for the outcome. That period is the outcome. The person you become through crossing the gap is constituted by the crossing, not by the arrival on the other side, but by the process of getting there. The capability you develop is inseparable from the process that developed it. The understanding you build is inseparable from the effort of building it. The person you become is inseparable from the experience of becoming. This means that the miracle, even if it were possible, even if something could reach in and give you the outcome without the process, would give you something hollow, a capability without its roots, an understanding without its structure, an identity without its history. It would be like being handed a building without the foundation beneath it. It would look like the thing from the outside. It would not be the thing. The process is not a means to an end. The process is the thing itself. The work is not what you do to get somewhere. The work is where you are. And where you are, if you are genuinely engaged, if you are genuinely curious, if you are genuinely willing to be wrong and to fail and to continue anyway, is exactly where you need to be. Let me tell you one more thing, and then I am going to leave you with something to sit with. I have spent my life doing physics. And the thing about physics, the thing that I think is its deepest lesson for how to live, is this. Reality does not negotiate. Reality does not adjust itself to accommodate your preferences or your beliefs or your hopes or your comfort. Reality is what it is, and your relationship to it is a choice. You can choose to engage with it honestly, to look at it carefully, to update your beliefs when they conflict with it, to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere you did not want to go. Or you can choose to protect your current picture of it, to explain away the evidence that challenges your beliefs, to wait for confirmation rather than seeking disconfirmation, to substitute the map for the territory. The first choice is harder. It is permanently harder. It never becomes easy. But it is the only choice that produces genuine understanding, genuine capability, genuine growth. The only choice that results in your picture of reality actually resembling reality rather than just resembling what you wished reality looked like. And this choice, this fundamental orientation toward honest engagement with the world, is available to you right now. Not when the circumstances are better, not when you have more time or more resources or more support. Now, in the exact circumstances you are actually in, with the exact capability you actually have, you do not need a miracle. You need to decide that you are done waiting for one, and then you need to start, not perfectly, not with full understanding of where you are going, or how long it will take, or what you will find on the way. Just start. Take the first genuine question you have and actually pursue it. Take the first gap in your understanding you can find and actually look into it. Take the first thing you think you know and actually test it. And then do it again the next day, and the day after that. The compounding will take care of the rest. Slowly at first, then faster still. Until one day someone who knew you before looks at you and thinks, how did that happen so quickly? And you will know that it did not happen quickly. It happened at exactly the rate it always happens. One genuine engagement at a time. One real question at a time. One honest acknowledgement of not knowing at a time. One deliberate choice to look carefully rather than assume familiarity at a time. There is no miracle. There is only this. And this, it turns out, is enough. More than enough. It is everything. So here's what I want to leave you with. Not as a rhetorical question, as an actual question to sit with seriously. What are you currently waiting for? Not in general. Specifically, what is the thing that you are telling yourself needs to happen before you can start doing what you actually want to do? What is the condition you are waiting for? What is the miracle you are expecting? Name it. Make it specific. Write it down if you have to. And then ask yourself this. What would you do today if you knew with certainty that the thing you are waiting for was never going to arrive? Because it is not going to arrive, and the sooner you stop waiting for it, the sooner you can start doing the thing that actually works. The universe has no miracles to offer you, but it has something better. It has the laws of physics, which are completely indifferent to your hopes and completely responsive to your actions. It has reality, which does not negotiate, but does respond. It has the extraordinary compounding power of genuine engagement sustained over time. It has the work. The work is enough. The work has always been enough. Start.